Hey, this is Steven from LegitTechTutorials, and today we're going to be talking about return types. So we already went over the parameters. So, for example, and this has to deal with methods again, by the way. A return type is what you see on the left-hand side of a method. So, like we said last time, is we said cooking, and in here we had the parameters. And over here is the return type. Now the return type could be the exact same thing as the parameters that you're bringing in. Sorry about those dots, those were my fingers triggering it. Okay, so for example, let's say in this cooking param, most of the time the good idea is that each time you have a method is to at least return type int. The reason why is that people will return a 0 if it failed to execute, or a 1 if it did execute. So what does that look like? So here, let's say that we had a cooking. So we return a type of int, and we want to say that it has been successful. So it goes through its stuff here, and then you have an end here, and we're going to say return 1 because it went through. So it's going to return 1 here. So for example, if you did print, if you did on your main program, you did a print, and then you did cooking, right, with your parameters after that, it will go into cooking and do that cooking method, and then it will outprint the 1 saying that it went through without a hitch. Or you could have it in an if loop and see if it returns 0 or 1. So what you would have, for example, is you say you have an if, and then you say cooking with whatever your parameter is going to be. But you could also do, that would be a boolean, but let's say it says it's got to equal 0. So if it doesn't work, then do this. Then try to figure out what went wrong, output a message, do whatever. So that's a good example of returning one type. You could even return a data system, but when I say data system, I meant a data structure like a car or a student or whatever. And like I said, it's at the beginning here of a method. It's at the beginning. So most of the time, for example, let's say that you were doing a blackjack game, you would return a card to know which card you drew, right? It'll tell you, it'll outprint and tell you. But most of the time we use that for something called getters and setters, which will be in the next video, and that's the best example. So those examples will really bring in these two concepts. Those two concepts of parameters and return types are got great examples for getters and setters, and they're highly used in programming for security and access, and not keeping your program given it the ability to be very stable and not mess up your variables. Okay, so another type, so you have like double. You could have any primitive or any data structure in the front as a return type, but it's kind of hard to think of a random example. That one's a big one, the int, because you're returning a 0 if it failed and a 1 if it passed. That would be a perfect type. Most of the time in C, for main, they'll have that int main void inside. So yeah, so here's a double. It returns. You have to have that line inside here. So we're saying like jump or whatever. You have to have that return something, and that something has to be of type double, and that's where you return this value, and that's where yeah. So I guess you could think of it almost like scan, right? When you scan in an input, it returns something to store in a value. Same thing with this guy here. It returns a value. Same thing with if you do a comparison, you say if something is equal to something else, it returns a Boolean, true or false, right? So same thing, if you looked at this jump, it would return this double number. So I can't think of any good ideas of what this would be. It's very good to think of it as some sort of math situation, right? You said, for example, we're going to say multiply then divide or whatever. We're going to say multiply though. And then in here you're going to have your parameters for the variables you pass in, right? And for this case we're going to say that they're ints x and y, right? That these are both ints. So, and then in here we're going to have it return a int. So inside we're just going to do a simple multiply, x times y, and then we're going to return that. That is probably what a the x plus y this does, except for of course it's working in assembly. But you could think of it as that. So like that looks almost exactly similar if you did this, right? It's going to return that type. It's going to return of type int there, or double. I think it's probably double, so you could have decimal places. So that's a great example right there. You want to multiply two variables. So you multiply it, then you return, and now you stored that in an int. So you could get that and store that. So now let's say we wanted to store that in a z variable. We're going to say z multiply x and y. There you go. Now that value that's returned here is stored into this x. And of course x is of type int. So that's what these return types are used for. And you'll see the best example in the next tutorial when we talk about getters and setters. Alright, so this has been Steven from LegitTechTutorials. I'd like to thank you for watching my video. If you like this video, please subscribe for more videos like it. If you have any questions, email me with your questions. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.